Israel has the right to defend itself.
Bibi Netanyahu is not the leader that Israel needs at this time, I can tell you that.
Marianne Williamson is a best-selling author, spiritual leader, and political activist who has announced her candidacy for the 2024 United States presidential election. Known for her passionate advocacy for love and compassion in politics, Williamson is embarking on her second presidential run, having previously sought the Democratic nomination in 2020. Williamson's 2024 campaign is built on the premise that fundamental change is needed in the American political landscape. Her message is one of transformative hope, urging a collective shift from fear to love in the way we govern and engage with one another. Throwing money at a problem doesn't really solve a problem either.
The US for being the only country that funds public education through property taxes.
This country and our democracy, and it's also led to the deaths of probably millions of people around the world. And we become a government of the corporations, by the corporations, and for the corporations. Their freedom, I mean, it's like the freedom that was articulated by the Soviet Union. Yeah, you can vote, you have a whole array of choices, but they determined what those choices were. We have not been the gold standard for democracy for a long time, I'm afraid. And I think that Americans are some of the last people in the world to wake up and see that. Some of our children are traumatized before kindergarten. I think at this point that children are the greatest collateral damage of unfettered vulture capitalism. I think that we need to have more respect for the raging testosterone in boys.
The Avenue of the Strongest is a podcast dedicated to exploring the lives and experiences of the most inspiring individuals from around the world. Each episode features interviews with fascinating guests who share their insights and wisdom on a variety of topics, including education, impact, motivation, health, and learning. Here are your hosts, Anayet Chowdhury and Vlad Suleiman.
Marianne, welcome to the show. It's a pleasure having you on.
Thank you. It's wonderful to be here, and I appreciate you having me.
I want to go ahead and paint a more personal picture to start out with for our audience. And I want to get to know the young Marianne Williamson. How was it like growing up in Houston, Texas?
Well, it's interesting. You see your childhood differently once you're an adult. And you see it differently as an older adult than you do as a younger adult. Because as a younger adult, you're all about analyzing what was wrong, what was neurotic. You're in your individuation period, and all of that's natural, actually. But as I've gotten older, I've come to appreciate what a blessed childhood I had. It was a more normal time in America, if that word truly can be used legitimately. I had parents who loved each other, who loved us. I certainly had a hard time because of that moment in American history. There was not yet an appreciation for a certain kind of emotional depth. And even within the family culture that I grew up in. So I can see, looking back, that I was not mentored on that level of things the way I think I needed to be. But I also, to be honest, feel grateful that I grew up before childhood was pathologized. I think it's awful today, the way normal childhood experiences are made into a problem, particularly with boys. That's what I'm particularly concerned about, actually, today. And so I think that more than not, I was set up by my family, by my culture, and by my government in ways that I would not have known. Good public schools, good public libraries, good public parks, safe streets. I realized ways I was set up to win that millions of American children today are not.
Can you clarify what you mean by how specifically boys, are currently not set up for success? This podcast is sponsored by ArgoPrep, an award-winning edtech company serving over 1 million students nationwide. We understand that as parents, you want to ensure that your child receives the best education possible. Say hello to ArgoPrep. With over 15 plus educational awards earned in just the past year, ArgoPrep's platform offers your child video lessons, quizzes, drills, printable worksheets, and more. Best of all, your ArgoPrep subscription comes included with 4 comprehensive digital workbooks that cover all 4 subjects: math, ELA, science, and social studies. Visit argoprep.com today and start your free trial.
I think that we need to have more respect for the raging testosterone in boys. And making a boy sit there hour and hour and hour and hour and hour to learn within that without respect for the natural aggression even. You know, I remember reading years ago, it was a little reflection on the word aggression. And it was talking about how if you were to take a microscope and you were to look at a little blade of grass coming up through the dirt, to that dirt, the blade of grass is very aggressive. And I think that boys, even more than girls on this level of things, are seen as behavioral problems in situations where the culture is the problem.
How do we show disrespect to boys right now?
Well, I think even in some ways our educational system, I think there has to be a lot more room for boys and for girls for experiences of learning that are not chained to a desk all day. You know, I remember when my daughter was in school and there had been a lot of, the even violent episodes at schools were beginning. And she was going to a private school. And they had instituted this rule. And the rule was a product of the assumption on the part of the officials that the best way to fight negative socialization was to cut out all socialization. The kids were not supposed to speak to one another in between classes. They were not supposed to pass notes. They were, and I remember there was only 30 minutes of any kind of a sports activity during the day. And I remember saying to the principal or whoever I went to see, I said, I'm a writer. I'm home all day, but I have to get up every once in a while. I walk into the backyard. I can't, my nervous system can't just stay chained to a desk. And I thought how wrong-minded this was, that instead of teaching positive socialization, we were just trying to prohibit socialization. Well, that's prescription for dystopia right there.
Right.
And I was just reading an article about boys. I read 2 articles about boys that were talking about that specifically in terms of, boys used to be running around the neighborhood. They used to be playing in the garage, playing basketball, running around. And now, because that's not fostered and even denied in certain cases, then it shows up in behavior that then too often the parent rushes to see as a behavioral problem. And the culture sees as a behavioral problem. I mean, there are some schools that are actually drugging children, putting children on pharmaceutical drugs just because they consider them at risk. The child hasn't even done anything yet to suggest that there's actually a problem.
That's wild.
So obviously our educational system, and we all know that, it is a product of a kind of post-industrial or even industrial paradigm where people are being trained to be good little workers. And
I
think there needs to be a profound
agree
shift.
with you. And actually, I remember actually looking at a video that you made back in 2019 talking about the need of creating a different department, a department that is focused on kids before they even enter preschool. I don't know if you remember that, but I thought that
Well,
was
yeah.
actually a great idea.
Well,
I agree with that. I agree that we have millions of, I think you used the word traumatized students. I'm not going to quote you
yeah,
because I don't
yeah.
remember exactly word for word, but I thought that was fascinating. And as educators, I personally agree with that actually.
Hey there, before we dive back into the episode, I wanted to stop for just a brief moment and express our heartfelt gratitude.
Knowing that you've chosen to spend your time with us, to listen and engage with our content truly warms our hearts.
Every story we share, every topic we discuss is made much more meaningful if you are here with us on this journey.
If you found value in what you've heard so far and you're excited as we are about the episodes to come, we'd be so honored if you'd hit that subscribe button. It not only ensures you stay informed of all of our new content, but it also supports us in continuing to create and share. From all of us here, a sincere thank you.
Now, without further ado, let's get back to the episode.
The idea, as I talked about in the last campaign and this one, is for a Department of Children and Youth. We now know things about the human brain that we didn't even know 15 years ago. 90% of the brain is developed in the first 5 years. So we need far more focus and attention on early childhood. And what you're referring to is when I pointed out that some of our children are traumatized before kindergarten. I have met elementary school principals who said that they had children on suicide watch. And in schools, public schools throughout this country, they have trauma rooms. Well, what is going on in this country? You know, we talk about trauma-informed education. It sounds so enlightened. But the next question needs to be, why is childhood such a trauma for millions of children in the richest country in the world? What's going on? So for me, when I think about education at this point, I think of it within a larger panoply of issues regarding children and youth. Nutrition, electronics. You know, I'm sure you probably realize, you know, the city of school district of Seattle, Washington is suing the tech companies because it's now proven that there's not just correlation, but causation between how much time a child spends on a tablet and the quality of sleep, the quality of focus, the ability to read, the ability to learn. I mean, this is an all-out disaster. And I also, one of the reasons I want this massive transfer of resources into the lives of our children, I think at this point that children are the greatest collateral damage of unfettered vulture capitalism. They aren't old enough to work, so they don't have any financial leverage with which to advocate for themselves. They're not old enough to vote, so they're not a voting base or constituency. So their needs are routinely neglected. When all of these institutions were founded, women didn't even have a voice in the public sphere. They couldn't vote, and raising children was seen as women's work. So the needs of children were not factored into anything. So it's a whole paradigm shift to put your children first.
The Democratic National Committee isn't organizing any debates, and you've spoken a lot about this in your in a lot of your previous videos. And we definitely agree that there should be a debate because the American voters deserve, or not deserve, the opportunity. I think it's a requirement. It's not fair for the American voters because, you know, we're not getting a debate, right? You're not going to go ahead and have the opportunity. So why does it ultimately hurt the American voters?
Because
what the DNC is doing?
Democracy has to do with choice. Thomas Jefferson said the only safe repository for power is in the hands of the people. The reason you have a free press is so that there can be a free flow and availability of information. But if the people don't even know what their choices are, then how can people exercise their freedom? I mean, it's like the freedom that was articulated by the Soviet Union. Yeah, you can vote, you know, you have a whole array of choices, but they determined what those choices were. So that's what the DNC has been trying to do. They have stated from the beginning that the way they now see their role is to be the advocate for President Biden's reelection. Now, a lot of that is falling apart in the last few days because polls show him deeply losing, actually, to Trump in major battleground states, 5 out of the 6.
Right.
So I don't know how much longer that is going to work. On the other hand, their idea, it doesn't have to do with not suppressing my candidacy or anyone else's. It only has to do with how can we open the door to others who we choose, whether it's Gavin Newsom, Governor Pritzker,
Hmm.
or anyone else. So none of this is very democratic, is it? It's quite manipulative.
I agree 100%. With that statement being said, that this is all manipulative, I want to briefly talk about big media, corporatized media. You mentioned in another interview, CNN, MSNBC, and many other outlets have not given you the opportunity to speak or appear on their channels. Again, speaking for Vlad and I both agree, as an American voters, this makes me personally outraged. I believe that media outlets have an obligation, a duty to the American people to give every running presidential candidate a platform to speak, to let American voters decide what they think. Especially, I think now it's more than 50% of Democrats are asking for a different nominee. So my question is, how is this fair? Like, what needs to be changed over here, right? It's clear. You use the word manipulation, and you're right. I don't think it's a fact. So what needs to be changed here?
The American people themselves have to rise up and recognize this game for what it is. And I think that many people are. But, our press secretary sends the pitch to CNN, any show on CNN or MSNBC or Joe Scarborough or any of the Sunday morning shows, and we hear nothing back. Now, 4 years ago, I was allowed on those shows. I was subtly mocked, and not so subtly in other circumstances. But now there's an agreement, we will not let her on. There's too much of a chance that she'll have a viral moment. There's too much of a chance that people will actually like her. This woman is standing for a fundamental reform of the way we do business in Washington, and we can't have that. That's basically what's happening here. Now, I'm rising in the polls, however, and at this point, their unwillingness to allow the American people to make what you and I would see as a real free choice here is becoming obvious to a lot of people. But when you ask what needs to be done, I mean, I spend most of my time asking that question. But it's a real lock, and it has to be enough people who are sending money to the campaign. So they're at Marianne2024.com in order for us to be able to buy, compensate with bought media, volunteering. It suppresses your campaign, of course, because people don't even think you're running. So because they don't think you're running, they don't name you in polls, and then you're not named in polls, so people don't want to give them money to invest. I mean, they know what they're doing by not having me on. It's an effort at invisibilization. It's an effort at erasure. And I think people who see it on both left and right don't like it. But these companies, it just goes to show you how corporate America controls this country.
No, considering the undeniable influence of digital platforms, the surge of populist sentiments, and the evident democratic erosion we are witnessing globally, some argue that American democracy is at tipping point. How do you respond to critics who suggest that US is no longer the gold standard for democratic governments? And what bold transformative actions would you champion to restore faith in our system?
My response is, duh. We have not been the gold standard for democracy for a long time, I'm afraid. And I think that Americans are some of the last people in the world to wake up and see that. Now, my frustration as a candidate is that I do believe we have a critical mass of Americans who do see it and would like to take a different direction, who recognize the course correction that's necessary. You can either have corporate power as your governing principle and short-term profits for short profit maximization for huge corporate entities, your bottom line, or you can have democratic values and democracy and humanitarian values, your bottom line. And we have shifted from a government of the people, by the people, for the people, which is what the essence of a democratic society would be. And we become a government of the corporations, by the corporations, and for the corporations. Everything we've been talking about is an example of that. Because these huge media empires are corporations. What will it take to fix this? Well, one thing it will take is exactly what we're talking about here, a president who's willing to name that. More and more people elected who are willing to name it. People who are willing to recognize we have public policy after public policy made by legislators who do more to serve the goals, the profit-making goals of their donors, than to serve the goal of safety, health, and well-being of their own constituents, even when the constituents have expressed what their will is. And of course, that's the death of democracy right there. But that's how much influence corporate money has on Washington. And the suppression of my political campaign is a perfect example. It's just a microcosm of that. It's no different. Whether it's suppressing progressive candidates, whether it's carcinogens in our food, whether it's toxins in our air, whether it's PFAS in our water, whether it's ramping up fossil fuel extraction when we should be ramping it down, whether it's chemicals in our pesticides, whether it's wars that should never have been fought. I don't believe the problem is that Americans don't see it. I think on both the left and the right, a lot of people see it. That's not, in my experience, the problem. The problem is this sclerotic political system that sits on the will of the people in just the ways we've been talking about here today. And the only thing that can override this is a revolution at the ballot box. The only thing that can override this is the people showing up, waking up, showing up on the primary level. And then the other thing that is certainly helping in a big way to correct the economic injustice is the resurgence of the labor movement. So on a purely economic level, the labor movement is handling it quite beautifully with people like Sean Fain and so forth. But in terms of electoral politics, we're going to have to, the people must intervene now. The people must intervene. But in order to do that, the people have to come out of this almost trance-like state that, weirdly enough, Democrats seem in even more than Republicans in some incredibly ironic way.
And when do you think we stopped as Americans seeing American democracy as a gold standard? Because it wasn't always like that.
Well, I think those were very pivotal years right after World War II. And once Ronald Reagan, we could talk about what year did, it was sort of a gradual process. But with Ronald Reagan and trickle-down economics and the Koch brothers agenda and the complete glorification of this idea that, if you just give more money to the stockholders, that all that money will trickle down and lift all boats, the biggest lie, the biggest con ever played on the American people, it was in full bore. So in that sense, even if you say it started with Reagan, I think it's fair to say that the Republicans started it, but no Democrat has stopped it in terms of presidents. And we need a president now who will just come in and cut the cord and say, this has got to stop. It's been an aberrational chapter of American history. It has hollowed out our middle class. It has decimated this country and our democracy. And it's also led to the deaths of probably millions of people around the world, at least indirectly.
Yeah.
I'd love to focus or shift this a little bit to the topic of education. In fact, I understand your late sister Elizabeth was actually a teacher. Do you have any memories or experiences of her being a teacher?
My sister, she was Elizabeth Jane, and she was called Jane. She was a third grade teacher. She also taught autistic children. I'll tell you a story about my sister's teaching, okay? She had a third grade class, and she said, okay, we're going to learn, it's Martin Luther King Day today. So you want to learn about Martin Luther King? And they went, yeah. She said, okay, all day we're going to be learning. Who here wants to help us learn about Martin Luther King? Raise your hand if you want to help us learn about Martin Luther King. So kids raised their hand. She said, okay, now you go to the back of the class. Okay, they all went and sat in the back of the class. And then she said, okay, we're going to color now. Okay. So she started handing out the paper. And to the kids in the front of the room, she handed out nice color paper, sheets of paper. And to the kids in the back of the room, she tear just some of the paper and give it to them. And they go, Miss Kessler, you didn't give me a full sheet of paper. And she said, oh no, you're helping us learn about Martin Luther King Day. And then she said, okay, we're going to have our Crayolas now. And she'd give all the nice Crayolas to the kids in the front of the room. And then she'd take a box to the kids in the back of the room, and they'd be like little stumps of crayons. Miss Kessler, my crayon isn't good. She said, oh no, you're helping us learn about Martin Luther King Day. And then when they walked to the lunchroom, they stood in the back. When they got to the lunchroom, they had to stand and sit separately. The food wasn't as good. By the end of that class, those children had learned the meaning of Martin Luther King Day. And to me, that is a memory that so displays who my sister was, her imagination as well as her heart.
Wow, what a great story. Thank you for sharing that.
You know, while I was preparing for the interview, I saw a lot of your interviews, and a lot of times you've criticized the US for being the only country that funds public education through property taxes. So my question is, what alternative funding models do you propose to ensure equitable education for all?
You simply make that your goal, that the federal government compensates in any place where it needs to, and which happens to some extent. But right now, we need a president who says, within 10 years, every public school in America is going to be a palace of culture and learning and the arts. But on the other hand, or at the same time, it's not a but, it's an and, in ways that we were talking about earlier, some of these children are traumatized by the time they come to that school. I mean, the breakdown is so multidimensional at this point. We need a season of repair in this country. You know, when Roosevelt said, it has become fairly clear to me we're going to have to become fairly radical for a generation. I think that in order to truly repair, to truly get this country back on the rails, it's going to be a generational challenge. I don't claim that in my 4 years in the White House, I could turn the ship around entirely. I think I could get it around the bend, though. I could get it around the curve. And that would help with such things as a Department of Children and Youth. But I'll tell you something. The one common denominator in all of this is poverty. The one common denominator in pretty much every situation that we could describe as problematical is a rigged economic system. Louis Brandeis, late Supreme Court Justice, said you can have large amounts of money concentrated in the hands of a few, or you can have democracy. You cannot have both. So as long as you've got 80% of the American people who on some level are struggling to survive, you're not going to have thriving communities everywhere. And where you have, as 70% of the American people say, they live in constant economic stress. When you have stress, obviously the stress does trickle down. The money doesn't trickle down in this country, but the stress trickles down. And it trickles down to the least powerful person in the system, and that's the child. So universal health care, tuition-free college and tech schools, subsidized childcare, paid family leave, guaranteed sick pay, guaranteed living wage. These are absolute essentials to repairing our country because they are essential to repairing people's lives.
I want to focus on one more important element here, which is the decline in the teaching profession. There's so many teachers that are saying this industry, this sector, is highly insulting. It's disrespectful. I don't even receive enough pay to put food on my table or clothe my children. And it's really unfortunate that in America, we face a big lack of respect in the profession. Forget about the money. Forget about the salary. Forget about we pay our teachers like nothing. We don't have any respect for teachers.
Well,
we don't have any respect. And so, yeah, go ahead.
Well, the two sort of go together because in a obsessively capitalistic society, money is what gets you respect, right?
Right.
We're losing our teachers. We're just losing
Yep.
them. And for good reason, people are saying, this isn't what I signed up for. I didn't sign up for crowd control. I didn't sign up to have to deal with a child's behavioral issues, making it impossible for me to teach the rest of the class. I didn't sign up to be afraid of students. I didn't sign up
Right.
to risk my life.
How do we
And once,
change this? Or is this problem so big again
But
that
was it different 20 or 30 years ago? What we had
absolutely,
teachers.
when I was growing up, of course, 30 years ago, 30 years ago, I was an adult, but when I was a kid, I remember there was a horrible crime committed at an elementary school when I was a child, but it was so unheard of. I mean, it was like, today it's like, where was the latest massacre this week, right? Um, I mean, I don't want to whitewash or romanticize American society when I was growing up, because I think that there were also neighborhoods that I wasn't living in where there was already a lot of stress
Mhm.
and strain, clearly. So I'm not trying to romanticize the past in all layers, but the difference. It seems to me, is that there was a time in my life where there was a general consensus that we were supposed to try to be good. We were supposed to try to treat people well. Government was supposed to try to make it easier to help people thrive. Today, people are just awakening from this awful delusion that somehow government doesn't owe people anything, that all government owes basically is to satisfy its donor class, because its donor class claims to be the guardians. They have the right to be the guardians of the economy, turning us into a
Right.
country where instead of the economy serving people, people serve the economy. They wake up early in the morning. You have 1/3 of Americans who live on less than $15 an hour. Half of them can't find a place to live. You tell me how much bandwidth that person has to be a good father, mother, lover, friend, husband, wife, citizen. How much time and bandwidth do they even have? And where is their stress and anxiety supposed to go? Often
You
it
know,
goes to
speaking
alcohol, it goes to drugs.
speaking about education, I'm really shocked how US is standing in this sector, because in recent years international assessments like Program for International Students Assessment have shown that US students lagging behind their peers in countries like Singapore, Finland, and Canada in reading, mathematics, and science. And additionally, the National Center of Education Statistics report that while high school graduates rates are in all-time high, there are significant achievement gaps across racial and socioeconomic lines. And critics argue that our education system, once global benchmark, is failing to adapt to the demands of the 21st century. And they also point to the fact that many teachers face challenges like overcrowded classrooms and lack of resources, with significant percentage leaving the profession within 5 years due to these pressures. So, given these challenges, how do you respond to the assertion that America's education system is in decline and failing? And what transformative strategies would you champion to not only uplift our education, but to revolutionize the way we approach it?
Well, if you look at the studies that you just referred to, white children living in privileged neighborhoods, they're doing fine. And that's why it all goes back to economics. That's why it all goes back to
But
economics.
so if we give the same amount of funding from the wealthy districts to all the other districts, is this going to solve the problem, or is it the notion that, hey, throwing money at a problem doesn't really solve a problem either? Because we've seen many case studies where we've thrown money at solving even micro problems, and throwing money is sometimes not the answer.
If all you do is treat the symptom and not the root cause, then you waste millions because you're not spending billions. It goes back to what I was saying before. If the child is traumatized before 5, but you just at 5 put that child in a beautiful building with the right teachers, you're still going to have some problems there. That's why it's got to be a recognition. We have a multidimensional breakdown, and we're going to have a multidimensional solution. So if you only throw money at a symptom, you're right. And then the critics of even trying to solve it will say, we tried. But they tried from an old mechanistic paradigm. It's like when Einstein said, you will not solve the problems from the level of thinking that you were at when you created them. So the 20th century mindset is very mechanistic. This piece isn't working. We'll throw money at fixing this piece. But it was just a symptom. You didn't treat the disease. The 21st century is far more holistic, far more whole person, in which you point out, you realize, wait, we also have to look at the nutrition of the child. You have to look at the lifestyle. You have to look at the family dynamics. So you're going to have to look at whether or not the community has been decimated because jobs have been taken away. You're going to have to look at whether or not how many of those men were sent to prison at a 20% rate higher than their white counterparts. You're going to have to look at all manner of injustice. And it's not just economic injustice, it's racial injustice, it's criminal injustice. And that's why you have to take a whole look, and you're going to have enough of us enrolled in the conversation. Now, when I talk about being president, I've talked about how I would see my presidency as only being there for 4 years, really articulate what the larger problem is, get us around the curve, and then hand it over to a younger generation to take it from there. Because a baby boomer should not be president in 2028, first of all. But it has to be. But I feel that in my 4 years, I could help incubate a larger national movement of people who know you're going to have to hunker down for the next 20 years. Because some of this will be past the point of no return, perhaps not in my lifetime, but in your lifetime. So everybody has, pardon?
What do you think about giving the money to parents? And I see a lot of parents right now going to homeschool, and we pulling out the money funds from the public sector and giving to the households, and they do homeschooling themselves.
It's a complicated topic. On one hand, as a parent, I can understand how in some situations a parent would say, I don't want my kid going to a school where they're going to be bullied in the hallway or blowjobs in the bathroom. I mean, I can understand some parents going, no, I'm taking my kid. On the other hand, it has its own series of problems. They used to call public schools common schools. This goes back to the issue I was talking about earlier about socialization. And also, obviously, if you take money away from the public school system on a certain level, how is it going to get better? But I don't think we can blame parents in many cases for not wanting their kids in certain schools. On the other hand, we're learning things about what's going on in some of these homeschool environments. We're learning about Christian nationalism, some far-right indoctrination, But that's why
there's no simple solution, Vlad. That's the reality. That is a sad reality.
Well, hold on a moment.
Where to even start? Where to even start approaching all these problems? I mean, it sounds like very difficult task.
Well, this is why you need as many people involved in the conversation and tackle these problems.
The Western mind wants to know what to do. The American mind immediately goes into, just tell me what to do and we can do it. Because we've never had a time in our history where that didn't work for us. We're go-getters. Just tell us what to do, Mr. Roosevelt, and we can do it. This is more like a cancer that has metastasized. Invasive measures will only make things worse in certain cases. So this is a moment for doing exactly what we're doing here. Let's really analyze, go deep. We have to become deeper thinkers. Now, the very Western mind says, no, we got to do something. The more Eastern orientation would say, no, we have to understand something first. It's okay that we're having these deeper conversations because we're going to have these things have to be dealt with on a holistic basis. We have to take an integrative approach. It's nutrition and economics and education and criminal justice. It's all of the above. And so when we have the larger conversation, we have to become more 21st century thinkers. But I think the leader to take us into this period of initiation, to help inaugurate it, is someone who herself or whomever recognizes the larger picture. We have so many brain cells, so many synapses that are not operative yet because they're still thinking along the old model. We have to talk about root cause solutions. If you go to my website, there's a whole section called root cause healing, where we have to get at root causes and not just solutions. When you say, where do you start, though? For me, as a presidential candidate, you have to start with economic reform. Because at the bottom of so many of these situations is the fact that people are struggling to survive. And so they don't even have time. They don't even have bandwidth to be parents, to be the people that we need to be to even begin to handle these things. If only 20% of your citizens have even the economic ability, really, to sit and think and to be part of the solution, that's I can tell you right there, that's certainly
That's a
not
great
an
point.
American,
That is
prescription.
a very good point.
How long you think it will take to approach this cause root problem? Is it 5 years, 10 years, 20
I
years?
feel that if I can get in there for 4 years and I am successful at inspiring, the old model was, well, you elect the person you want and then you go back to your life. Then I'll come back again and vote in 2 years. That's old. That's over. Everybody has to now awaken to seeing politics and political activism as simply a layer of a well-lived, meaningful life. My goal would be, as president in those 4 years, to be in deep conversation with younger people such as yourselves so that everybody's aligned in the conversation. I get on the helicopter at the end of my 4 years. I say, take it from here, and you're so ready. I believe it's going to be your
Right.
it is going. I personally, it's going to take 20 years. But within
Yeah, on this
10,
note,
you can have the template established. Within 10, the template could be so established that if you are able to keep, the monsters from the door. So 10 to create a new template of possibility, 20 to have a completely transformed America.
on this optimistic note, let's transfer to AI topic.
Okay.
So in recent years, the development of generative AI and traditional AI has been transformative across multiple sectors. And there is a big concern that this technological revolution could lead to significant job displacements. And according to McKinsey Global Institute, that suggests that by 2030, intelligent agents and robots could eliminate as much as 30% of the world human labor. So, with this in mind, what's your personal perspective on the job market over the next 5 years in the context of AI developments?
I think job displacement is the least of the dangers. That's to me yesterday's conversation. It's terrifying. On one hand, brilliant stuff. On the other hand, the potential for catastrophe. Catastrophe is there, and we've got to stop pretending it's not. It is an example of technological development that far outweighs our moral and spiritual development. It's an example of just because you can do something, think long and hard about whether or not you should do it. It doesn't
Should there
take a cynical mind to recognize the dangerous potential here and risk of the subjugation of the human race.
should there be stricter AI rules and legislation across generative AI specifically.
Absolutely, there should be, and I'll give it to the president. He recognizes this, but we're behind. We're behind the curve. We should have been on this 10 years ago.
Yeah,
Washington
I
just
mean, I completely agree with you. I agree with you on that. But on the other note, when you take a look at, this is out of the box, right? So
it's
United
already there.
States,
I agree
if
with
we
you.
go ahead, right, exactly, right, because now if we restrict ourselves, who's to say other countries like China and other countries are going
All
to
the
do the
more
same, right?
reason. All
This
the
is what I
more
mean.
reason.
We're in for a catastrophe here.
Well, once again, everything's tied to everything. We're going to have the only way the human race is going to survive for another 100 years is if we are able to create greater collaboration. As
Yeah, that I
people used
agree
to
with.
say, okay, well, we've been adversaries with other countries, it's been an adversarial paradigm, and we're going to move it. We're going to have peace in the world by creating a competitive paradigm. Well, not necessarily, because we've learned, look at China. Yeah, you can be a kind of thriving capitalism and still be a dictatorship, right?
Right.
Now we need to move into collaboration. And it's
I
the same
agree.
thing, a completely different kind of thinking. And that's very relevant to the conversation about China. The only way to reasonably assume a guarantee for the survival of the human race 100 years ago, that's going to have to include, and the United States and China and other major powers are going to have to be in a collaborative mindset on the topic of AI,
Yeah.
which is almost
Yeah.
hard to
On
That's
that
imagine
very
that
note,
we
hard.
become that enlightened, but that's it's going to take.
on that note, do you think at any point we'll have UBI on the table, universal basic income?
Well, I'm all for UBI as a stopgap measure. UBI does not compensate for the basic flaw of unfettered capitalism. So I would be cool with a UBI that went for 5 years, set to expire, and renewal to be considered.
Hmm.
Does that make
I like
sense?
that. I like
Mm-hmm.
But
that.
this,
Yep.
but isn't UBI will raise another problems of people becoming not educated because they'll just get the universal income and that's it. They'll not be
Well,
developing themselves.
$1,000 a month isn't going to mean that people can just live as couch potatoes and not have to do anything else, but it will take the critical sting out of many people's suffering. I mean, am I wrong on
Marianne,
that?
we only have two questions. No, I agree.
You,
I agree with you.
yeah,
I do agree with you, especially if there's a time limit as well, and after a
Yeah,
couple of years we reassess
yeah,
on what we're going to do with this.
yeah.
Well, this has been such a wonderful conversation. We only have two remaining questions for you. Again, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for
I
having.
I thought it would be wrong of me if I didn't bring this up in today's conversation as what's going on in the world today. I would like to briefly talk about the situation in Israel and Gaza. And very early on, you called for an immediate ceasefire. Obviously, it's heartbreaking to see thousands and thousands of innocent people continue to die on both sides, but we can see that many children are dying in Gaza, and we all agree, and I think I can speak for you here unequivocally, that Israel has the right to defend itself. But we must protect innocent civilians. Data and survey that are coming out right now suggest that majority of Americans are in support of a ceasefire, and it's showing that voters are starting to lose faith in the current administration, as the Biden administration have repeatedly rejected for growing calls for a ceasefire on grounds. My question to you is, do you think the current administration is making a critical mistake in not calling for a ceasefire, or are they doing enough?
I think that the ceasefire itself is not the only issue here. So a ceasefire is where two sides agree to something. A
Right,
ceasefire does not mean unilaterally one side stops shooting. It's a ceasefire
right,
agreement. So it would mean we stop that, you get back the hostages.
right.
And then we go into an immediate plan for something moving forward. What the president has done, which is out of alignment with many people in the United States, is that his immediate response displayed, his immediate response displayed an appropriate moral clarity. But right after that, it displayed a pro-Israeli preference that did not include appropriate recognition of the injustices suffered by Palestinians over the last decades. So that, for instance, when he said the next day, I'm going to meet with Jewish leaders. If I'd been president, would be I'm going to meet with Jewish leaders today and also with Arab American leaders today. Right. So on one hand, the recognition of the brutality of Hamas, he was slow on the uptake to recognize that not all Palestinians are Hamas by any means. But there are a lot of people on the left who are slow on the uptake and not realizing that not all Israelis are Bibi Netanyahu either. So I think that what we're going through right now is a moment in which there is such imbalance in the perspectives of people on both left and right. And I believe that the United States needs to see our highest ally as humanity itself. So ceasefire, yes, but ceasefire is an agreement between two.
Right.
And it should be a ceasefire in exchange for the release of the hostages. And even without the release of the hostages, it is absolutely appropriate that people are deeply, deeply upset, not only about the deaths of people in Gaza, but the overall strategy around that, which is Bibi Netanyahu's this man is not the leader that Israel needs at this time, I can tell you that. And we should remember that hundreds of thousands of Israelis had been, even prior to October 7th, in the streets protesting his leadership. If I were president, I would be working very much, and I'm sure some of this is going on behind the scenes, not only with European allies, but with Arab allies as well. But it's complicated because who's going to be, it is very complicated. But of course, a ceasefire is absolutely necessary, and so is the release of the hostages.
Before I let Vlad ask his last question to you, out of curiosity, a personal curiosity here, how exhausting is it to try? I see you're traveling to so many places and coming, so I commend you on that. It's really amazing. So, how's that journey been? I know you've experienced it before in 2020, but now you're back on the road and so many media events and traveling and speaking. How's that journey been like?
The emotional exhaustion.
On a personal note.
The emotional exhaustion is just what it is. Many careers are physical exhaustion. Let me take that back. The physical exhaustion.
Yeah.
It just is what it is. And many people's work is physically exhausting. The emotional and psychological experience is somewhat brutal. The invisibilization, the erasure, the insults, the smears, the lies, the politics of personal destruction. Worse this time than last time. And worse than other candidates go through. So that's something. But when I'm out there actually discussing things that matter with the American people, it's exhilarating. And I'm in it to win it. And I hope that, listen, nobody knows, nobody ever has guarantee of winning a political contest. There's a phrase, fully invested in an effort, yet unattached to the results. And that's what you're trying to achieve. 100%. This place within yourself where you're fully invested in the effort. Nothing worth doing in life is predicated on whether or not you have a guarantee of quote unquote success. It's a very difficult thing to run for president, and I honor anyone who answers that call within their own gut.
I agree. Flat.
Marianne, on this note, I would like to end our interview with a question that we ask everyone who comes to our podcast, which gives us, the power to learn the person even more. So my question is, who has been the most strongest and inspiring person in your life, and what lessons have you learned from them?
My father, he used to say you have to have a sense of adventure. And he taught us to think for ourselves. That would be the answer.
That's the perfect answer. This is actually what I teach my kids. I have 2 daughters every day. Think for yourself. You have your own head. Don't pay attention to anybody else. What they think of you, what they think of any situation. You have your own head. Think for yourself.
How old are they?
3 and 6.
Keep it up, Daddy. Keep it up.
Yeah, I will. So Marianne, thank you so much
Thank
for
you.
joining our podcast. It's
Thank
been
you very much.
pleasure speaking with you and learning
Thank
from
you
you.
both.
Thank you.
All my best. Thank you. Bye-bye.